Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at what is one of the cream of the crop of the B550 boards. This is the Gigabyte Aorus MASTER. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at Gigabyte's Aorus MASTER. This is a top-of-the-line B550 board from our friends over at Gigabyte. And actually this one has come from one of our friends of the channel, David Aitken. Thank you very much for letting us unbox this and go through the motions with it. He picked this up as a Amazon warehouse deal and got it for a fantastic price, which is part of the reason why he picked it up. These normally retail for, yeah, let's just say a lot more than what he actually paid. The price he paid more closer to the regular prices for B550. I'm not going to say the exact prices because he did get a fantastic deal on this, but it did make a lot of sense. This normally is one of the upper tier boards and does cost a lot of money, around about the sort of 250 range. He picked it up, I think, for in the region of about 160, 170. So that puts it very slap bang in the middle of the prices of things like the MSI Gaming Edge Wi-Fi, those kinds of boards, and offers very similar levels of performance, if not better, due to the absolute huge amount of metal heat sinks and VRM capacitors on this board. It really is a joy to behold. But is it the right board for you? We'll go through, do an unboxing, look at the features, look at the chipset options, all the connectivity, and then we'll come back with my final thoughts at the end, and then you can work out whether it's going to be suitable for your build or not. So first of all, looking at the packaging, as you can see, it's the traditional kind of Aorus look packaging, color coded to fit in with the brand. You've got B550 Aorus on there, Master. This one is 3rd gen ready. It hasn't got the 5000 series logo on there, so we will need to flash the BIOS on this one to support the latest 5000 series processors. If you want to see how that's done, you can click on the link up here, and we have gone through and done that in depth. Also as well, if you want to see a complete walkthrough of all the features of the BIOS, then again, click on the link up there. That will be linked as well, so you can check out all the features, things like the Smart Fan 5, etc. There's a ton of features on this board, there really is. So yeah, we did do a bit of a deep dive on that one, so if you want to check it out, please feel free to do so. So as it says on the front, this is B550 chipset, and this is one of the few B550 chipset boards which actually has 3 M.2 slots, all of which can be used with PCI Express Gen 4. Yeah, weird, not entirely sure how they do it. Well, I know how they do it, but it's a little bit of a trade-off, which we'll get into a little bit later when we discuss it. There are some trade-offs of this board. Despite its lofty price tag when it's brand new out of the box, there are a few gotchas with this board, I'll be honest with you. But for certain people, for certain instances, this board makes a ton of sense. For others, there's a few things which you may want to look elsewhere. But again, we'll look at that a little bit later and we'll discuss it in depth at the end of the video. On the back of the box goes into some more of the features, and also we've got a nice picture of the board there. It talks about the B550 Aorus MASTER, the specifications, which I'll give you a close-up of so you can see all that stuff. This has got 16 direct phases on the VRM, which is insane. It's split into a 14+2, so you've got 14 phases for the main CPU, and also for the SoC you've got another 2 phases. Again, these are direct phases and using up to 70 amp chokes. I can't even do the math on that. This is capable of taking some serious ampage through those processors. So regardless of what processor you're looking at putting on here, I think this is going to see us well into the AM5 territory of processors. So we've got an advanced thermal design. There is actually 8 fan headers on this board, which is absolutely insane. All of which are PWM, zero fan, etc. You can use with water pumps, etc, etc. Yeah, the cooling on this board is mental. It really is. Hardware Unboxed did a fantastic review of this on the VRM, so if you want to check out the VRM temp reviews, I'll put the link in the video description below. You can check out yourself. Essentially, it won everything. So yeah, if you're looking for a high-end B550 and you just basically want your VRMs to be icy cold and the PCB backplate, yeah, this is the one. You don't need to look any further into the video, just hit the buy button down below. Anyway, moving on. So we've got 3 PCI Express Gen 4 M.2 slots. We've also got 2.5 gigabit LAN, which is from a Realtek chipset, so that's the RTL8125. There is also an Intel chip for your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so that's using the AX200 chipset. Wi-Fi 6, so no problems there, and Bluetooth 5.0. So connectivity-wise, yeah, you've got pretty much every base covered there. Also, it goes down the bottom about speed fan, etc., BIOS, Q flash. This has got the Q flash button on the back for flashing the BIOS, as we kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. Again, if you want to see how to flash the BIOS via the USB stick, then yeah, you know where to click. So I think that's pretty much it for the specs. Let's take a look and see what we actually get inside the box. And there is actually quite a lot in this one. So we've got the board itself, which we'll quickly put to one side for now and take a look at that a little bit later. So in the box we have got the sticker sheet, which is very common these days to get sticker sheets. I don't know anybody who uses them, but certainly if you want to, you can. There is the B550 Aorus MASTER user guide, etc. Goes through what all the bits and pieces are in some depth. What there isn't in here is actually a guide that tells you what the BIOS readout does. This has got a digital BIOS readout on the board. Normally you'd have some sort of pamphlet telling you what all the codes mean, but sadly, for some reason, that isn't included. Also inside there's something in French, no idea. There is a multi-language installation guide, which is quite handy if you're not too sure about how to install RAM, how to install your CPU, etc, etc. That's covered in some depth there. You've got a driver DVD with the, well, I was about to say with the latest drivers on, but this board's about 6 months old already, so yeah, they won't be. You probably need to update your drivers, but if you haven't got any access to the internet and you do happen to have a USB CD drive, then yeah, this should be helpful. Next, underneath, we've got a ton of cables and bits and bobs. There's all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff here. So first of all, you've got your Wi-Fi antenna and Bluetooth antenna. So that just attaches with SMA connectors onto the back of the motherboard, nice and easy to do. And being that that is a kind of like a standard design, you just stand it up somewhere and yeah, that'll be absolutely fine. Next up, there's some cable tie, or zip ties, or Velcro ties, however you want to call them. So those are Aorus logo cable management straps, so that's really nice. Nice inclusion is one of these, which is a basically a connector. So you can connect all your front panel connectors on your PC case into this one block connector and then plug one single block connector into your motherboard. I really like those. I think they should be standard on pretty much all boards now. Let me know what you think in the comments. Next one is a slightly weird one. This is actually a noise sensor, or a sound sensor, or basically a sound pressure sensor. So there is a very, very small kind of microphone or diaphragm on the end of this cable. The other end plugs into the motherboard, and essentially you can use this as a means of controlling the fans in your system. So if the noise level or pressure levels are getting high in the system, you can configure it so that it basically keeps it quieter. Quite an unusual add-on to any motherboard, and that's the first time I've actually seen this in any motherboard, so be interesting to see how that actually works out. I think it's a little bit of a gimmick, because normally you just use your thermal probes and things like that to actually measure your temperatures to then regulate your fan speeds. So yeah, to have a noise sensor as well is a little bit of an odd one, but certainly very interesting. Next up, we've got 4 SATA cables, which is always good to see. And there, in each one of these packets, there's a right-angled connector and also a straight connector. There is a addressable USB header adapter for plugging in certain types of 3-pin devices. There's a 4-pin RGB extension cable, so if you've got an RGB strip and you're plugging it into one of the 4-pin headers, you can use that as an extension, and that one's about 12 inches long. There is a Gigabyte Aorus badge, which you can stick on the front of your PC should you feel the need. And the last thing, now this is a slightly unusual thing as well. They've really gone for the unusual things on this board. So these are temperature sensor probes. So on the end is a temperature sensor, and the other end of it is a 2-pin connector which plugs into the motherboard. So you can route these to wherever you want in the system, and using SmartFan 5 you can actually control your fans basically by a temperature in a specific area. So you could, if you wanted to, put one of those little diodes in between the fins on maybe your graphics card cooler, or I don't know, wherever you want in the system, and then that will send a temperature reading to the motherboard, which then you can tell the fans to keep an eye on this particular sensor to ramp up or ramp down the fan in that particular area. Now again, you have got 8 fan headers. All of them are zoned as well, so you can take complete control. So say for instance this specifically is plugged into one of the VRM fins. You could then set it so if the VRM reaches 40 degrees C, then the fan, which is right next to that, can ramp right up to keep things cool. Kind of weird, but kind of cool at the same time. So let's take a look at the motherboard now and check out some of the features. So let's take a look at the motherboard itself, and you'll probably see the shots change quite a lot in this, because this thing is a heavy board. The actual package, when you get the whole thing, motherboard, box, the whole lot, is just over 2.2 kilos, and the board itself has got to be getting on for maybe 1.5, 1.6 kilos. It is a monster of a board. There's so much metal on here, it is ridiculous. And actually, let's look at one of the more ridiculous things straight away. So looking at the back of the motherboard, you can see we've got this absolutely huge metal heatsink which goes around pretty much the entire board itself, obviously except for the backplate for the processor, which you need access to. But in the key areas where the VRM are, which is up here and here, there's actually pads on the back of there, so they make direct contact to the back of the motherboard to dissipate the heat from those VRMs. Now, being that we've got a 16-phase VRM, there's not a great deal you can do to actually space them out to give them that much cooling. So by having this on the back, dissipates some of that extra heat on the back. Now obviously, you're probably not going to have the greatest of airflow at the back of your case, but certainly this is better than nothing. And again, as from what we've seen from the thermal tests from Hardware Unboxed, the VRM on here runs cooler than any other B550 board in its class. So yeah, this has worked out particularly well. Now you can actually remove it all if you want to check out or to do cleaning tasks. If you've got a particularly dusty area, quite easy to do, just a couple of screws and you can take all that off, and the pads are actually reusable as well. So yeah, very good for maintenance purposes and very bloody heavy. So let's move around to the front of the board again. So again, let's have a look at some of the other cooling solutions here before we take too much of a deep dive. So cooling wise, we've got these really nice finned heat sinks which go around this area. It's covered in plastic on the top, but the actual areas themselves which need airflow are pretty well ventilated, so it's not as if it's choking it, it's purely like a cosmetic trim on the top. There is a heat pipe that runs along the cooler itself, and it's like a flattened copper based one, very much like what we get on CPU coolers these days. So that really does transfer the heat from those VRMs into the fin stack, which gives you, they say, about 300% more performance. So that equates to roughly about 30% lower temperatures overall than it would be with a solid block of metal. So they really have gone all out on this. And again, the results speak for themselves. The VRM temperatures on this are insanely low. So we've got those heat sinks there. Also, there is 3 heat sinks as well for each one of the M.2 slots. So those are all very nice, very similar looking. So keeps in kind of that same look and feel across the board. It is relatively neutral. We've got some greys, we've got some blacks and silvers, and we've got a ton of chrome as well. There's chrome areas around quite a lot of the board actually. We've got chrome supports on the PCI Express slot on the top here. Also the back of the M.2s have all got chrome on them as well. Even the memory slots are all reinforced with that chrome surround. The power connector is as well on there. And even your 4-pin EPS on the back also has a little bit of chrome around it. So yeah, they really have gone to town with this board, which is what you'd expect if you're buying a board which is around about the £250 mark here in the UK or above. You do expect that level of attention to detail. Whether or not it's justified on the B550, I'm not entirely convinced. Let me know in the comment section below. This is probably more than I would spend on an X570 if I'm completely honest, but they've got a bargain, so it works for me in that respect. Moving on for even more cooling. Now obviously, because this is the B550 chipset, we don't have a fan on the PCH section here, so just this block of metal. There are some fins in it, so that will help. It's not just a solid block of metal, there are a few fins to get temperatures down. Again, nice and easy to remove, just 4 screws on the back. You can take it off, take a look at the chip underneath and maybe put some paste on there if you wanted to. It does come with a thermal kind of weird pad on there, which is almost like super glue. So we've removed that already and put some Arctic paste on there to, well, hopefully do a little bit better. So I think that's pretty much it for cooling. Obviously we've got 8 fan headers on there, which we'll go through and point those out as we go through. Let's take a look at the connectivity. So let's start in the very top corner. So here we've got the first of the PWM style fan connectors. Then you've got a 8+4 connector for EPS power. It's slightly unusual actually, 8+4. Normally you get 8+6 or 2 8s or just a single 8. But yeah, it does give you that little bit of extra headroom there for putting a bit more juice through the processor, should you need to, for higher end processors. Moving along further, we've got another 2 fan headers here. So you've got CPU and CPU optional. Again, if you're using a dual fan setup or maybe an AIO and you've got extra fans, that can be quite useful. This strange little connector here is the noise sensor, which we talked about earlier. So you can plug in your noise sensor into this connector here and run that wherever you want to in the case to well, detect noise. We've got some of our addressable RGB and regular RGB connectors here. So there's a 3-pin 5V addressable RGB and also a 12V 4-pin version there. So depending on what sort of RGB setup you're going for, both of those are covered in this particular area. Directly below that, we've got our 4 memory slots. Now the memory slots on here, this is slightly insane also. These will support XMP speeds of up to 5,400 megahertz. Yes, 5,400 megahertz, that isn't a typo. Normally most boards in the B550 range you'd be looking at 4,400 megahertz. These is 5,400 megahertz. Crazy, crazy times. I suppose it does help. The board itself is a 6-layer PCB, so that does help. And obviously you've got the 2-ounce copper as well, which separates all the individual sections. Yeah, again, this is a high-end board. These are things we kind of expect, but they've gone over and above in pretty much every aspect. So moving on from our memory slot, we've got the first of our diagnostic LEDs, and I want to say the first, there's more than one. So we've got a digital readout here, which gives you an idea of what's going on with your boot process and when the system's running, etc. So if you get an issue, you can look at the diagnostic code on there, look it up online and work out what's broken or what you haven't connected. Quite handy. I actually found if you try and power the board with too little power for what your system needs, this will actually go to 0, which is a slightly unusual one. You wouldn't think that, but it does. I did do some BIOS testing and a BIOS walkthrough, which I said you can check out. But I actually only used one of the 4-pin connectors on there, and due to the processor I was using at the time, it was basically undercharging or undervolting the board. So the diagnostic LED was 0, which I kind of come about by chance. And yeah, so if you're getting problems with your system or it's a little bit laggy in the BIOS, look out for 0 on here. If it is, it basically means the motherboard's not getting enough juice. So let's move on from that. So we've got our 24-pin power connector here, which again has got that metal shielding all around the outside edge to keep it in place, which is awesome. Obviously we've got our AM4 socket there, which supports pretty much most processors, all the upcoming 5000 series and maybe 6000, who knows. As with all B550 boards, your mileage varies with older processors. So I've actually used this with the 3400G and it seemed absolutely fine. Went into Windows 11, no problems. If you're using something a little bit older, maybe a 2600 or possibly a 1700X, those kinds of processors, again, things do get a little bit funky due to the PCI Express lanes and that kind of stuff. So before you ask in the comment section below, will my processor work? It's a very difficult one to actually say 100% yes or no, depending on the configuration that you've got actually installed on your board. If you're using a 3400G, nothing else on the board, and just a M.2 drive in here, yes, it works fine. I have tested that. Anything else, we're not sure on at the moment. So moving further down, we've got another 3 system fan headers there. So that's actually a really nice place to have them. So if you've got a case, this has got 3 fans on the front, you've got direct access to 3 fan headers. Perfect positioning in my opinion. Moving down slightly from there, we've got another diagnostic debug LED. So this is the kind of 4 one. So you've got VGA, boot, CPU, and DRAM, that sort of stuff. So again, if for some reason you can't see that, you can see that and vice versa. I'm not too sure why they put both on there. I guess it's kind of leftovers from a previous design board. So it's on there, we'll leave it on there. We'll just add that one on as well. So let's move down a little bit further down the board. So obviously we've got our chipset, which is underneath here, which is the B550 chipset, which we've said probably once or twice. Really nice heatsink. And on the side here, you've got a Thunderbolt connection. So you can connect up a Thunderbolt connection if you wanted to onto that port there. You've got 6 SATA ports. Again, because this is B550, there's that kind of weird sharing and caring thing. So depending on what you're using on here will depend what you can use on here and vice versa. So if you're planning on populating all 6 of these and 3 of these, you won't. It can't be done. If you want more details on what works and what doesn't, head over to the website. They do list on there what ports are shared, etc., which ones get disabled, all that kind of stuff. But essentially, what we've got is, if we go over to that now, so we've got PCI Express Gen 4 ×16 slot here at the top, but it also doubles up as a ×8 slot. So if you want to use either one of these 2 M.2 slots here for a M.2 NVMe drive, the graphics card slot will automatically go down to PCI Express Gen 4 ×8. So if you're looking to get every single FPS out of your graphics card, and it's a high-end graphics card, this is something that you do need to consider. This will halve the bandwidth available to that slot. Depending on what card you've got, it may not make a difference. If you're looking at something like a 3070, possibly a 3080, you should be okay. Once you start going up a little bit higher, 3080 Ti, 3090s, that kind of stuff, where they do start saturating that bus a little bit, you may find a slight difference. I've seen a couple of reviews where people have done testing on this with a graphics card in there and with M.2 drives in here. It does take off a few FPS. It's not a huge amount, not kind of double-digit figures, but certainly there is a noticeable difference in terms of benchmarks. If you're just gaming, chances are you'll never notice it, but you do need to be aware of the fact if you are going to use these extra slots to get your PCI Express Gen 4 x 4 drives at their peak speeds, which is beneficial to the system, it is going to have a detrimental effect on your graphics card performance. So let's run through the slots again. So PCI Express Gen 4 x 4 M.2, PCI Express Gen 4 x 16, PCI Express Gen 4 x 4, PCI Express Gen 4 x 4. The 2 x 16 size slots both run at PCI Express Gen 3 x 4. If you're using extra SATAs, then one of those last slots will get put down to PCI Express Gen 3 x 2. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing, but essentially all of the M.2s can run at Gen 4 speeds. It's just it will have an effect on the rest of the system. There just purely isn't enough bandwidth to go through. The PCI Express slots here at the bottom, they are actually coming off the chipset itself. So again, that is why those will have some effect on your SATA, and conversely, obviously SATA will have some effect on those. So yeah, it's a little bit murky. To be honest with you, I would say if you're looking at spending this amount of money and you are concerned about having a ton of drives on there, save yourself the hassle, get the X570 version. Then you've got PCI Express Gen 4 throughout everything. Happy days, no issues at all. It will cost you more, but you don't have to have any of those weird calculations going through your head. So anyway, that is that kind of wrapped up. Again, if you're not too sure, reach out to me on Discord or in the comment section and I'll try and clarify it a little bit better. CMOS battery in this position here, not the greatest of places for it. I would have much rather seen it a little bit lower down so it's accessible. If you need to reset the CMOS and you've got your graphics card installed, yeah, that's going to be really difficult to get to, but I guess it is what it is. I should actually mention the M.2 slots. These two at the bottom are NVMe drives only. The top slot, because it's connected directly to the CPU, you can use SATA drives or NVMe, but obviously because it's PCI Express Gen 4, realistically you're going to want to use NVMe to get the speeds out of it. But certainly if you want to, if you've only got a SATA drive, you can use it in that top slot there. So let's go back down to the bottom. So in this bottom corner, we've got our front panel I/O, which again, you can use that little block connector to connect everything up. Above that, there is the CMOS reset switch, which you can just bridge out there, which actually might be a beneficial thing to do. When you're wiring up this, maybe wire your reset switch to the CMOS reset button, because there aren't any physical buttons on the board, which is a little bit of a downside. Some people like to see a kind of a manual reset button or whatever. But yeah, if you don't want to have to get inside or flip out the BIOS or try and get a screwdriver into there, just wire up your reset button while you're doing your initial build. So next to that, we've got our TPM module connector there, which no one ever uses. There is a USB 3.2 header there for your front panel connections. There isn't a Type-C front panel connector on this board, which, considering its price, is a little bit mad. I don't know why they haven't put that on there. They have actually put a ton of USB 3.2 ports on the back of the board, but nothing to put headers to the front of the board. So if you're thinking about putting this into a case which has got a dedicated USB Type-C connector, it isn't going to do a lot. So yeah, do bear that in mind. That is one of the big kind of gotchas of this board. No Type-C front USB. Very odd. Anyway, moving on from there. So we've got another two PWM style headers there for fans. Next to that is our USB 2.0 ports. You've got a pair of those there for, again, internal devices, maybe a Corsair iQ, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's all very cool. Next up, we've got some RGB connectors again. So you've got your digital and also your analog RGB, so 12 volt RGB and 5 volt RGB. Next up, there is a odd connector, which is something to do with a demo mode. I'm not entirely sure what the deal is with that, but it's a strange 2-pin connector, and it doesn't appear to be anything to actually connect it to that comes with the system. So yeah, that's a system programmer's kind of tool, I guess. Then you've got your audio front panel connector there. The audio is actually really good on this. It's the Realtek ALC 1220 VB, which means vibes. So yeah, this basically is pretty much top of the line for the 1220 chipset. Really good sound, really good noise, signal to noise ratio, all that kind of stuff. Using Nichicon caps, it's a really, really decent setup. If audio is your thing and you haven't got a separate sound card and you want to get the best out of your audio on your motherboard, then yeah, this is a really, really good choice. All of the audio is done on separate tracks, and also there is a little plastic shield over there to kind of cover up an area of the board where there's other chipset stuff going on as well, to keep the chip actually kind of protected as well. There is the Realtek chip, which is hidden underneath here, which you'll probably see from some cutaways. So yeah, that's all protected and also isolated. There is one more RGB connection on the board, yep, 5 in total, which is just hidden in there. So if you're using an AMD cooler, which has got the 12 volt RGB connection on there, you can plug that straight into there. It's quite handy. Yeah, tons of RGB, tons of fan headers. Basically an all-round amazing board. It really is. Just those strange things of not having the USB Type-C for the front is a little bit peculiar. But let's take a look at the I/O and see what's going on there. So looking at the I/O on the back, we've got basically hundreds of USB ports, which is kind of weird. Again, they've routed all of it to the back and there's nothing going to the front apart from kind of the standard 3.0, well 3.1 gen, whatever it is these days. So you've got 6 USB Type 2 ports, so you've got 4 there, another 2 there. Just before that, you've got your 2 SMA connectors for your wireless antenna. Underneath that, you've got an HDMI connector, which is HDMI 2.1, so it's going to give you 4K 60 if you're using an APU. Nothing higher than that, and strangely, no display port, which I guess really a board of this level, it's unlikely you're going to be using onboard graphics, so this is more of a kind of a gesture more than anything, just so if you've got maybe an APU and you're trying to test the system, then you can get an output to see if it's actually working. Realistically, I think if you're spending this much money on a motherboard, you're going to be putting in a pretty high-end processor. Next to that, we've got a pair of USB 3.2 connections there, and one of them at the bottom is your BIOS flashback one. Also, you've got the BIOS flashback button. Next to that, another 2 USB 3.2 ports. And moving on further, a USB 3.2 Type-C and a USB 3.2 Type-A. So yeah, that is a really good setup. Tons and tons of connectivity there. Really, I think they could have probably removed 2 of those and routed it to the front for that Type-C connector. It really is quite baffling. Anyway, above that, we've got the Realtek 2.5G LAN, which obviously backwards compatible with 1G and 10100, all that kind of stuff. Then we've got our audio connectors, which are all gold plated as well, to give you that better sound quality and all that kind of stuff. And there is a digital speed-if out for those of you wanting to hook up to a receiver of some sort. As you can see, obviously, the shield on the back is a captive one, so it is on there permanently, so you haven't got an I/O shield to lose, which I guess is the way things are these days anyway, but just thought I'd point it out. So I think that is it for the tour of the board. Thank goodness my arm is going to fall off. This is a heavy board. It is a heavy duty board. Let's face it, 16 direct phases on the VRM is insanity. The cooling solution for the VRM, again, is just complete overkill. This is about 10 degrees less than even the next best performing B550 board in terms of VRM ability. I am kind of lost for words how much they've gone overboard on the whole cooling situation. It really is insane. Which leads me to the point of why did they not put a Type-C front panel header on here? The target market for this, I'm assuming, are going to be creative professionals, hence the PCI Express Gen 4 across all these lanes, high-end gaming, or mid to high-end gaming. So these are the people that want the fastest possible, and probably want the newest and nicest possible, especially when it comes to showing it all off. So there's a distinct possibility that you're going to buy a case for this which has got a front Type-C connector, and Type-C is becoming more and more common, more and more popular, more and more devices are using it. And again, if you're a creative professional, if you've maybe got your footage on an NVMe drive in a caddy, you want to plug it into one of those Type-C ports to get that nice fast transfers. Yes, of course you can plug it into a Type-A, but then you've got to go fishing around, working out which way you're plugging it in, all that kind of stuff. Type-C is so much easier, and for the cost of what it must be to actually implement that on here, it's bizarre why they didn't do it. I don't know. I really don't know. This, from what I can tell at the moment, is revision 1.0, which normally they don't put that on the website unless there's a planned newer revision. So in my mind, I think there is going to be a revision 1.1 or 1 point something, which potentially might lose a couple of ports on the back and put a USB Type-C on the front. I don't know this for sure, it's just a hunch I've got, I don't know, who knows. AM4 is potentially coming to kind of towards the end of its lifespan. AM5 is definitely in the pipeline at the moment, so whether or not they will do that, who can tell the future? I certainly can't. One other thing actually, which I failed to mention earlier, there is the tiniest of RGB LEDs actually on the board, which is tucked away actually up inside here. I don't know why, it doesn't look particularly good, it doesn't really serve much purpose, but it is there. I'll get some cutaways of that so you can actually see what it looks like. When I was looking at the board I was thinking, well, that's a lot of money for a board with no RGB. And then, oh yeah, there it is, tucked away. Obviously it would be. Anyway, I'm going off topic here. So let me know what you think about this board in the comment section. I think for the price that David paid for it, I think it makes a lot of sense. The USB Type-C could also be potentially one of those things that he may have overlooked. I'll find out when we have a discussion, when I give the board back, or maybe when David watches this video. And he might just put in the comment section below, oh shit. So look in the comment section now and see if he's actually replied already. If he does, I will pin it so you'll know one way or the other. So definitely check that out. Yeah, for the price it was as an Amazon deal, I think it makes a ton of sense. At its normal retail price, if you're overclocking the hell out of your processor, and it's a high-end processor, then yes, the VRM on this makes a ton of sense. But if you're that sort of person who's overclocking the hell out of your processor, there's a strong chance if you've got that kind of money to spend on a processor, you've probably got that kind of money to spend on a graphics card. And if you've got the money to spend on a graphics card, you've probably got the money to spend on storage. So that is where you're going to start looking and thinking, okay, I've got my 3090, I've got my NVMe x4 drives. Am I going to lose performance on my graphics card by having those drives populated? These are the things that people possibly will be thinking, or potentially they'll be thinking after they've bought this and installed it all, and then realizing, why is my mate getting a faster FPS in his games than me? Definitely food for thought. So anyway, let me know what you think about this one in the comment section below. Is this the sort of board you would go for? Are you a fan of the Aorus look? It's a very distinct look in my opinion. The finned heatsinks is a thing, definitely. That should be on a lot more boards. I'd love to see that integrated on more systems rather than just those chunks of metal, but obviously I guess it does increase the cost somewhat. So yeah, let me know what you think about this one in the comment section below. This has been the Gigabyte Aorus B550 Master. I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.